is in your corner of the world. Welcome to our, third keynote of the morning. We're excited to have Dan Russell, who is the Uber tech lead at Google and in charge of the search user experience, and we're thrilled to have him today. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of everything, I want to make sure that I go over some basic information with you about the conference. We're going to start here. This is Dan's title. It's the Literacy in the Age of Google, so he'll be presenting on today. Here are the instructions for setting up your audio. So if you have not set up the audio wizard before, make sure you take a look at that. Okay. I'm just going to put it up there for a minute. It's under your Tools menu if you're having issues with your audio. And I'm going to start with the recording's already going, so we've got that down. And I want to thank our sponsors today, iEarn, BrainPop, AFT, GetIdeas.org, HP, Intel, and the International Baccalaureate for supporting our efforts. We're really happy that they made this possible. And you may want to check out the resources that these organizations bring to the table around global education. Dan, we typically start out, I give everybody whiteboard permissions, and they use the star tool right underneath the arrow on the left-hand side of the whiteboard to indicate where they are today, so you get an idea of the geographical spread of our group. So if everybody can take that tool and indicate where they are.
So the question, Lucy, is
that would be fabulous.
Where they are now or where they're from? Because
so it looks like we've got a couple. We've got me in Chicago, and Dan's in Chicago too.
But I'm from.
And somebody further north from us. Somebody in California, Southern California, some East Coast people. We've got somebody way down in Africa. Who's that? Where are you from? Please put your, you can put your location into the chat too, your specific location, so we can see where you're from. Mozambique, all right. This is great. So you guys can continue to add yourself to the map for a moment, and I just want to tell you a little bit about Dan, how I know him. A few years ago, I was asked to write a search curriculum for Google based on Dan's work. Dan has been working extensively with teachers around search literacy for a while, and these lessons were recently revamped, and Dan has developed an amazing site that I put into the chat earlier. Let's see if I have the link here, on search education. I think this is the most fundamental 21st century skill and really important. That we as educators continue to spread the word on how to search. The other interesting thing to know about Dan is that he has been teaching a MOOC. He's been teaching a course in power searching, I think twice in the past 6 months or so, and hopefully he'll tell us a little bit more about that. But I think it has important implications for how we reach the world with information in education. So without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to my friend Dan, who I think is one of the smartest people out there. We're blessed today with several Silicon Valley type people. We have Jim Fruchterman also from Meta-Tech, who's from the same neck of the woods, speaking tonight, and Dale Doherty from Make Magazine. So this is like Silicon Valley Day, I think, Dan. Anyway, thank you so much for being here, and we appreciate your time.
Sure, this will be great. So as Lucy said, I'm Dan Russell, and I'm the Uber Tech Lead for Search Quality and User Happiness at Google. So every time you use Google, I'm responsible for how happy you are, or at least I'm very interested in it. So because, as Lucy said, I do teach a lot of people how to search, one of the things that's become very clear to me is that it's an interesting world when you think about literacy in the age of Google. And that's what this talk is really about. What does it mean to be literate? And so I'm just going to start off with a really basic question. Are you literate? And I mean that to you individually. You know, there's lots of people out there watching this now, and I did what every good Googler would do when it confronted with a question like this. And I want to think about this as the sort of overriding quest for our talk today. Are you literate, and what does that mean? So I went around and I asked people at Google, are you literate? And one guy came back to me with this counter reply, which is, what do you take me for, an illiterate troglodyte? And I thought, what an interesting question. Because I asked the question, he answered the question back. And the question back reveals something about him because he used a very low frequency word, troglodyte, right? It's the kind of word you don't use unless you're trying to show off your literacy, unless you're trying to show off how skilled and how knowledgeable you are. So the question answered itself. So what I did in this quest to understand what literacy means is I did the obvious thing. I looked in the dictionary, and you know what it says there. It says literacy is the ability to read and write. True, boring. Uninteresting in the sense that all of a sudden, what does it mean to read and write? If you go into Google and look for X literacy, where X can be whatever, you go into Google Books, you'll find that literacy is attached to many, many different ideas. We can have notions of ecological literacy or legal literacy, ocean literacy, media literacy, emotional literacy. Well, this is not helping. What is literacy? So I did the next thing a Googler would do, which is I went to Google Ngram Viewer, which is a service we have that allows you to look for terms and when they were introduced into the English language corpus of books since 1800. Now this is a remarkable graph because I'm graphing in blue the word literacy and in red the word literate. And you see that they weren't used much before 1900, and it was only about 1920 when that number started to rise in the corpus. What was going on then? Well, if you know your educational history, you know that's when the literacy movement started in American education, and people started to pick it up. And interestingly, the notion of literacy and literate split apart about 1960. And that was largely a kind of a political, social movement that was happening there. So thinking about literacy leads me to ask the following question. I'm going to show you a few different pieces of concepts written down in some orthography, written in some spelling system. Which of these can you read and write? Can anybody read this? If you can, raise your hand. Anybody read that? Anybody read Arabic? Okay, let's try this. Anybody read and write Chinese? Interestingly enough, when I give this talk in Silicon Valley, I always get at least one or two people who can read Arabic, and about half the audience reads Chinese. Interestingly different cultural expertise. Okay? How about this? How many of you can read this? Anybody? And raise your hand. Okay. This is, for people who haven't seen this before, this is a regular expression. It's called regex. It's a kind of language in which you can express patterns. Okay? And I see the comment that we're all literate here. That's sort of the point, right? I don't read Arabic and I don't read Chinese. I do read and write regex. How about this one? Anybody read or write this? This is a program in APL, which is an old programming language that people used to use. And I used to be able to read and write this. Now I can barely read it. Interesting idea. Does literacy change over the course of your life? I can read that. I couldn't reproduce that. That's the game of life. You know that cellular automata game? It's in one line. So what does it mean to be literate? Just to be able to read and write is an interesting idea. So let me introduce you to this idea of algorithmic literacy. Here's a problem that we often get in computer science. And this is the kind of question you get asked if you're a Googler coming in for a Google interview. So you're a fresh new computer science student, you come in, and I might say to you, hey, can you solve the n queens problem? And the problem here is if you've got a chessboard that's n squares by n squares, in this case 8 by 8, can you place 8 queens on that board so they don't attack each other? So they're neither on the same diagonal, the same column, or the same row. And if you're going to pass my interview question, what you're going to do is do something like this on the board. How many of you can read and write that? So this is Python code. And it has the particular property that it's an expression form that's written out that encapsulates the notion of an algorithm, the notion that you can actually do something computationally to figure this out. People often use regular expressions. Remember we saw that before? They often use regular expressions in the context of Python in order to be able to, guess what, find information and express it. They can read and write in different languages. How many of you can read and write this? Raise your hand or send me a chat. Can you read this music? Okay. At least one person can. Great. How many of you can perform this? Same people? This is the kind of piece of music I can sit down and almost sight read this. I can actually play through this. This is a piece from piano music. And I can certainly, I've learned this over the time, and I can both read and write this. But you know and I know musicians who can neither read nor write, but they can perform the heck out of this. Are they literate? So is it the ability to read and write? Is it really embodied in that? So let me give you sort of the punchline. Literacy is this continuous and changing concept where it's the ability to read and write in a simple system or a media system. It's operationally defined with respect to your cultural group, so software engineers or Arabic speakers or people who write in APL. And it has with it an assumed body of knowledge. So the person who told me that they were not an illiterate troglodyte knew that I would know that the word troglodyte is a low-frequency word. It's rare. And the act of using it would indicate to him that he had that body of knowledge. So for me, literacy is this knowing enough about a domain to be able to read, write, answer questions, and, importantly, function critically in that domain. That is, you have enough knowledge to ask the right questions and make the right assessments. So let me ask this question to you. You're all literate people. Was Socrates literate or illiterate? Now, you know this is a famous Greek philosopher because he's carved in white marble. Now, I say that jokingly, but I mean it seriously, because we know from cultural convention that important people are engraved in the medium of white marble. Now, I'll tell you something. Socrates, this well-known Greek philosopher, could neither read nor write. Was he literate? The reason I bring this up is that actually this is Plato. This is his student Plato, who actually read and wrote down what Socrates said. And that's the only reason we know anything about Socrates. Okay? And in particular, Plato, echoing Socrates about the technology of writing, wrote in 370 BC. Let me read this with you. What you have discovered is an aid, not to memory, but to reminiscence. And you give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company, having a show of wisdom without the reality. Does this sound familiar to you? Does this sound to you like the argument about literacy and the internet? This is a 2,000-year-old argument, okay? And what's happening is that Plato and Socrates are questioning the value of writing because you no longer have to understand things deeply. Once these facts are written down, they're tumbled about anywhere among those who may or may not understand them. Interestingly enough, this same argument was resurfaced when textbooks first started appearing in the universities, because all of a sudden lecturers lost control. They no longer could tell students what was true and what was right, but they could start to read them by themselves and make their own interpretation. So literacy is actually coupled with this notion of technology, right? As we develop our tools and technologies like writing systems or like code or like Google indices, we invent them and they change the way we think and they change the way we work. So these are all technologies in use, right? We don't think of simple systems as technology, but they are. Think about it. What is alphabetization? It is an algorithm for indexing terms, for indexing titles, for indexing subjects, and so on. And the notion that you could recursively alphabetize in the first letter, then the second letter, and the third letter, and so on, was an algorithm that was actually took many, many, many years for people to figure out. So this is an intriguing property because now we're starting to see, we think about indexing, we think about information access in this interesting way. Now, you're all literate people, and I assume you know this quote from Boswell, who wrote in The Life of Johnson, that knowledge is of two kinds. We can know a subject ourselves, or we can know where to find out information upon it. Okay? You probably heard that before. What you might not know is the second paragraph after that. He writes, when we inquire into any subject, the first thing we have to do is know what books have treated of it. This leads us to look at catalogs and the backs of books in libraries. What he's saying, this is an interesting idea. It's not enough to know exactly where something is. You have to know how to get to it, how to find it. And what this meant in 1791 is you had to be white, male, and living in the United Kingdom, and of a certain age. You didn't know this stuff. You didn't even know it was possible unless you were in that particular social group. That knowledge leads you to technologies like this. Have any of you ever used this? Anybody? Okay, a few people, right? This is a card catalog, lovingly made in walnut. This is the chief technology for access to this kind of technology, the Codex Compendium, right? You think of this as a library, but what this really is a compilation of codices, that is, books that are bound, individual pages sewn up together in folios and then arranged in a linear order according to some particular index system. Dewey Decimal, Library of Congress, you name it. You have to know, though, what that indexing system is and what particular properties it has. Among other things, that it only assigns one book to one place in that system. So God help you if you're a book about multiple topics. The cataloger has to make some choice. Okay? Now, the world is really different. How many of you remember what this technology does? Okay? Yes. At least one person recognizes this. This is the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. Okay? 3 people. We've got 20 people. Does that mean that 17 of you have no idea what this is? This is an interesting thing. This is the Reader's Guide. The Reader's Guide was a periodic update to the index for periodical literature. In this case, I'm looking at page 168 from a particular issue. I'm looking up the concept high technology industries. And if you look there, there are about a dozen hits there. What I find fascinating is the way in which we assume that this is something everybody knows how to do. But in fact, the use procedure for this is relatively complicated. If you want to search for something, you have to not only look in the current edition, but the previous edition, et cetera, because it's not an integrated index update. You didn't even know that was a concept, but it is. You have to know what the properties of the index are in order to be able to use it accurately. That is, to be literate. This is life before Google, and I'll let you just look at this for a second, because I think it captures an interesting idea. I just thought of something I'd like to know more about. In the age before Google, you know, this is kind of the thing that happened. Here's a piece of data for you. Last month, Google served around, let's say, 50 billion queries. What were those people doing before Google? That's 50 billion questions in a month, right? It's an interesting thought experiment. What were people doing? And why were their information needs not being met? Of course, now, if I go to Google and do the query of high technology industries, I get a somewhat different answer than I got with the periodical guide, which is I got let's say, 216 million results. Say 250 million results we can find in 3/4 of a second. Question for all of us as users of this: what's being scanned? What's in the catalog? What's not? How do we know? So I want to introduce you to this idea of informacy. Informacy, to me, is knowing the structure of information. Knowing this is by analogy with the concept of numeracy. Know that information is and how to use it. Basically, how to use it in hand-to-hand combat. So let me introduce you to one fundamental sort of skill that people have to have in order to be able to read online effectively. And this is the Control-F, Command-F thing. Do people know how, I assume you all know Control-F, right? Or Command-F or Edit Find. But let me tell you, a lot of people don't. And this is this is like the first skill I teach for everybody when they ask. Okay? So what I do is I always give this example. Here's a web page. It's very long. And the question I ask is, how long did it take Beth Assange to run this race? And typically I ask this question of a bunch of people in my class, and this is what happens. This is a very typical class profile. You can see here that what's happening is that at this very beginning, in the left-hand side, a lot of people take about 10 to 20 seconds to answer that question. Those are the people who know that skill, Command-F, Control-F. But you could see out here, there are people out beyond 120 seconds. These are people spending more than 2 minutes to find the answer. And once you get beyond 120 seconds, a quarter of all the answers are wrong. They're not close. They're wrong. So a lot of these folks out here, a lot of these people just have no way to get to the information. So this is a kind of frightening piece of information because it means to me that a lot of people don't know how to actually read electronic text very effectively. So I did a study of this, and here are the very surprising results. I did a study of over 2,000 U.S. English-speaking Internet users, and 90% of them do not know that skill. And I asked that question as many ways as I could think. I interviewed people, doesn't matter. 90% don't know how to do that. Scarily, 500 out of 500 U.S. English-speaking Internet-using teachers, half of them do not know how to do this. That means they're doing searches, landing on a page, and they don't actually know whether or not, in many cases, the content they're looking for is actually there. Okay? We did another analysis like this of Firefox users, and about 50,000 of them, 93% have never used it. So this is a skill that everybody needs to know. So here's a great question. That's a fundamental skill. Here's another fundamental skill you need to know to be a literate Internet user. There are all these different genres and media types that are out there. Home pages, product pages, fact files, all this stuff. How many of you know what a spoof site is? Could you give me the name of a spoof site? Raise your hand online if you can. Can you name a spoof site? Okay, actually, if you could, in the chat window, type in the name of your favorite spoof site. The Onion, that's an excellent one. I don't know how many student assignments have been given out of the Onion. The Octopus one, you're one step ahead of me, Lucy. The Northwest. Anybody else have a favorite spoof site? There are lots of them out there. My favorite one is actually dihydrogen monoxide spoof site, but let's look at the Pacific Northwest tree octopus site. Because I don't know how many students have been assigned to write up the biology of the tree octopus, but they shouldn't without without a little bit of foreknowledge here. Yeah, I believe Lucy didn't see this before. The point is, this is totally a spoof site. It's completely a spoof site. And you can't figure this out by looking at the usual markers. It's very high quality. It's got a copyright. It's got an author. It's got all this stuff. You actually have to look at the internal structure of it and start to see, does this thing make sense? This is a beautiful, beautiful site. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go check it out. So there's the URL at the very top. But it's a spoof site, and that's an important idea to know. And then know that there are a lot of them out there. It's also important to know the conventions of our culture. So, for example, you all know emoticons, right? And you all know the acronyms and these key concepts and so on. But here's a great page I found on a question answering site the other day. Is it true that Rosa Parks would have moved to the back of the bus, but she was listening to her iPod? Yes or no? The first answer by Natasha writes, yeah, it's true. And then :P. Now, if you don't know that that's the universal emoticon for sarcastic response, you might say, oh, that's great. I'll put that in my report. And that's what Asker does. Thank you. I'll put that in my report. Oh, my gosh. This is not the way to evaluate trust or credibility on the web. More importantly, you need to understand conventions like this because they're everywhere. It's also important to understand that the impact that these conventions have on you. So, for example, one of the things we know from psychology is that the visual appearance of a document, up to and including font choice and layout, little things like that that you might think are important, they're actually deeply important. I'll give you an example. When doing research on, say, a topic like dinosaurs, you might end up on just say, this page, dinosaur Wikipedia page. The thing I want to point out to you is to notice a couple things here. Okay? Notice in the upper left corner, there's this Wikipedia nice round logo. On the left-hand side, there's all this stuff here, all these blue links. You see that? Structure is logo upper left, blue links left-hand panel, content in the center. This is all basic content. Nice pictures of dinosaurs on the right-hand side. Okay, that's a typical Wikipedia layout page, right? Now, you could have also landed on a page like this, which would have been the same kind of page, except this is on a site called Conservapedia. Notice the difference? Well, let's look at what's similar. Nice round logo in the upper left corner, blue links for navigation on the left-hand panel, content in the center, Nice pictures of dinosaurs on the right-hand side, okay? But we'll come back to this. What happens is that people tend to look at Wikipedia design pattern and carry over whatever they understand to anything that looks like it. There's a huge amount of sort of rhetorical style and information that people are learning. Part of the conventions of our culture are knowing things like this. So, for example, have you ever seen TLDR? Stands for too long, did not read. It used to mean, when it started, it used to be a sign for don't bother, the rest of this is bunked. Just don't waste your time. It has rapidly evolved to mean what follows in the next sentence is a gist or a summary of the entire rest of the article. It's kind of an abstraction convention. And you see this a lot, TLDR. Now, one of the things that is happening is we're living in a time when these conventions are growing very, very quickly, when the kinds of technologies are developing very, very quickly, and now you can ask what were previously impossible questions. So here's a question. Where is this? Anybody know? Well, of course, what you can do with this kind of thing now is use Google search by image. You can drag that image into your Google image search box, and it will tell you, oh, that's an image taken from the Red Rock Canyon Interpretive Association just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay? You could not answer that question in any plausible amount of time before last year. Okay? This is an interesting tectonic change. So it's not just that there's a lot of stuff out there, it's also that we're getting more stuff constantly. And the rate of importation is accelerating. Right? It's not just like there's a Library of Congress every new day, but the rate of acquisition is accelerating. So tomorrow will be 1.1 Library of Congresses per day. At the end of the year, it'll be 1.5. At the end of next year, it'll be 2. You see what's happening? You need to understand that basic property of the way information grows on the web in order to be competent. I'll give you another example. Every minute, how much content is being uploaded onto YouTube? 72 hours worth. Okay? That means every minute, 3 days worth of content are being uploaded. Okay? How can you use this? How can you be literate with this? So let me give you an example. A piece of my cultural literacy, my informacy, my ability to understand the information world, is that I know that I can translate documents from other languages into mine. So here's, for example, a J-pop singer whose music I appreciate. I wanted to find some of her music and be able to download it. How do I do that? Well, I go to Google and I type in the best approximation of her name that I've got, which is this one you see right here, Suji Ayano, right? At the very top. Now look what happens. You see this right here, translated form pages, okay? What's happening is it's giving me translated form pages, and I got to her official website in roughly 3 seconds. Okay, it converted my English approximation into the correct Japanese, did a search for that. Same thing if I go to look for my favorite South African musician. His page is in Afrikaans. I click the translate button, and I now know everything I need to know about Johnny Clegg. All of a sudden, the information of other languages and other cultures is accessible to me. This was impossible, or at least not impossible, but it was extremely slow, right? So informacy is really being literate about information. It's understanding what information is, understanding how we're shifting from impossible search tasks to instantaneous ones. But importantly, it's understanding that these things exist and that changes the way you frame questions. You frame questions, you ask questions, understanding what's possible. So let me introduce you to this new idea. Informacy is literacy about information. Meta-literacy is the next key skill that we need to acquire. Meta-literacy is being literate about, guess what? Being literate. That is, if literacy is being able to read, write, answer questions, and function critically in a domain, meta-literacy is being literate in that same way about literacy. Let me give you an example. It's knowing, for example, what the user interface is, what a UI is, how to read it, how to understand it, how to know what's possible to ask. I'll give you a quick set of examples here. This is the Google Maps interface, and I assume you've all used it, right? But this is the kind of thing, this is the way it looked in 2005. I'm going to give you a quick time lapse. 2005, 2006. Notice what happened? We moved the results on the right-hand side to the left-hand side. See that? We also started adding additional information. We added icons, we added reviews, we added the ability for you to write reviews, we started to get the ability to crowdsource it. We also added new capability. You see over here on the right-hand side, these tools appearing over here. We started to add new capability. So I'm going to flash forward here. It's changing all the time. So all of a sudden now you as a literate user of this are put in a new interesting space where you have to understand how these things change over time because new capabilities come around. It's as though not only did your card catalog get better and smarter, but all of a sudden it was able to spell correct for you or able to do new kinds of operations you couldn't have imagined before. Okay? So let me give you another example here. This is one of the Maps UIs. This is from 2006. You see that little tiny thing right here I'm circling right now in red? That was a UI icon that nobody used, a user interface, a little triangle. Nobody used that. Nobody noticed it. So in some sense, there's another one down here. You see it right there? That little arrow, that actually popped out. Doesn't matter really what it did now, but one of the things to take away from this is stuff like this changes, and it changes all the time. Okay? So it's important to understand that being meta-literate is understanding that this will happen, and you can track these changes. So part of being meta-literate is just as you had to know what was possible to do with card catalogs, you needed to know what was possible in the world of Google. So for example, what can you ask? What kinds of queries can you do now? Okay? If anybody has a favorite kind of query that they really are proud of, put it in the chat window. I'd love to see it. But here's what I want you to think about. Could you have done that 10 years ago? Could you have done that last week? And what will be possible next week? Meta-literacy is the skill of understanding that stuff changes constantly. So here, for example, maybe you've heard of Google goggles. These are not the things you wear in your eyeglasses. This is what you have in your cell phone. And in fact, you see me holding my cell phone there. I just took a picture of a tower at Stanford campus, and it's giving me the website. I have queried reality. I've taken a picture of some place that I'm at, and it tells me where I am and what it is in front of me and how old it is and who built it. This is a different world. Of course, you know you can talk to your phone now. You can talk to Google phone and ask various questions. You can ask your GPS directions and so on. And you can ask questions in interesting ways. So, for example, true story. I have a 15-year-old son who loves Stanford basketball. And one of the things about Stanford basketball is you go there, and like sports stadiums all around the world, people chant various things and all that kind of stuff. But if you go there, you can go to Stanford basketball, and they'll be chanting this thing. Anyway, there are no lyrics. It's just people saying, oh, ooh, like that. And he asked me, how can I get that on my iPad, my iPod? I want to listen to it. I want the MP3 version of that. And I thought about it for a second and thought, you know, there's no way. Shazam is not going to do it for you because it only works with pre-recorded digital music. That is, it's not in the index, right? You cannot recognize, at least now, people just singing the thing. There are various systems out there to do various versions of that, but they don't work for 10,000 screaming fans. Okay. The lyrics are ooh, 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 ooh. Okay, so that's not going to work. So I said, son, give up. No hope. So being a good 15-year-old son, he goes to Google and ignores his old man and types in ooh, 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 ooh. Now, you see that? You see that? That very first hit right there, that very first suggestion, ooh, ooh, ooh song, that's in fact a hit from a Q&A site, a question answering site. Thousands of people before him have asked the same question, and some number of them answered it. And I didn't know that such QA sites were so competent. He found it. He now has that song in his player. The point is, you need to know what's possible in order to be able to frame a question. So as an example, I gave this question. I gave this question to a crowd of 250 Googlers, people who you think would understand how to search on Google, right? And this is a kind of non-example of the wisdom of the crowd. I asked 250 people at Google how to solve this problem. Find me an aerial image of this house taken before 1977. How hard can it be? Huh. None of them got it. None. Why? They didn't think about Google Earth. Now, why is Google Earth important? Because in Google Earth, you can do a question like this. Turns out it's at 900 University Avenue, so you type in the address right there. And then using this tool up here at the very top, which is the archive image slider, this one right here, see that? Looks like a little clock. It allows you to go back in time and actually look at imagery that was taken at that location 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. And you can do this instantly. But if you don't know it's possible, you'll never think about this. You'll never frame the question in that way. You see my point? You have to understand a little bit about this. So meta-literacy is the skill of staying up to date, being literate about your own information, knowing how to frame your own questions. So this is relying on this basic idea of meta-cognition. So if you haven't heard this phrase before, it's basically your understanding, your awareness of how your own cognition operates. Okay? So how do you read? How do you perceive these things? How do you ask questions about this information as you go through it? Knowing how you learn and knowing what works for you and what doesn't. Give you an example. One of the things I do is I study how ultra searchers search. Now, these are people who do a lot of searches, hundreds of searches per day. So they all have this metacognitive skill of understanding how other people can help them out. It's what I call contact list intelligence. So one of the reasons to have a social network or personal learning network or even friends is that they extend your ability to know the world. That is, you can think of social metacognition as a literacy strategy because everybody I know who's good at this has a great contact list. For example, I once stayed at this, you can barely see it here. This is a beautiful sculpture right here I'm circling. It's a sculpture in the front of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in downtown Tokyo, the Roppongi Hills. Here's another picture of it down here below. I like that sculpture and I thought, interesting. How can I find out who the sculptor was? So, I'm a guy from Google. I can figure this out. So I went upstairs to the 24th floor of my hotel room and I started searching. 2 hours later, I realized I need to ask another human being. That's when my social metacognition kicked in, and I went down to the first floor and asked the concierge. And she said, oh yeah, the artist is, she told me the name. See, the metacognitive skill of understanding your social network is really important, especially for these difficult tasks like figuring out what this sculpture was of this particular film. So what I think is so fascinating about this whole area is it gets right to this point of what do you need to know to be literate? What do you need to know to be informant? What do you need to really remember and know, memorize deeply versus just know how to look it up? For example, you need to be able to recognize a huge amount about the world. And that's a kind of memorization, right? If I don't recognize the theme of a particular classical piece of music, say Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the particular movement, right, then I would be culturally illiterate. So the question is really a fascinating one here. What does it mean to be literate in a world where we have all these new kinds of opportunities, more content, more diverse kinds of content, and the ability to analyze, reanalyze, access, and recombine data using tools that are available online? Because once you understand this, you can start to reframe questions. You can start to actually ask questions in interesting ways. There are many, many different kinds of genres, and trust me, more genres are coming up every day. Every day we have new kinds of content, new kinds of genres, new ways of asking, new indices. Okay? And one of the key questions here is how do you understand what's a credible source or not? So in my class, I asked this question. So let me ask it of you. Is this a real fish or is this Photoshop? Raise your hands. People who say it's real, raise your hand. Say yes. Anybody think it's a yes? Real. Anybody think it's a Photoshop? Okay. We got some yeses, bunch of yeses. Okay. All right. Okay. Claire says no idea. I think, Claire, that's probably the right attitude to have about this. I didn't know either. And so when I give this in my classes, I do the same exercise. How many people believe this is real versus Photoshop? And it's almost always 50-50. Half people say yes, half people say no. The truth is, it's a real fish. It's called the blobfish, or Psychrolutes marcidus. It was first described in 1926. And the key thing I want students to take away from this exercise is it's very difficult to tell if images are real or not. I have a whole set of images that you cannot tell, literally, whether they're real or fake. Okay? And questioning and doing one more query, one more check, is a critical attitude to have about this. So you can find out that this one was first described in 1926. Here's another question. Is this a real one or fake? It's fake. How do you know it's fake? There's no cloud cover. So informacy is understanding the texture of information and knowing some properties of information. For example, that aerial imagery of the United States always has clouds. Okay? So I'm not arguing that you have to look everything up. You, in fact, have to know a fair bit. But you also have to have this notion of what's fake versus what's not fake. So Alexis Madrigal in the Atlantic had this beautiful set of images from Hurricane Sandy, and including this one, where the shark swimming down the streets of downtown New Jersey or someplace in New Jersey, which was easily branded as a fake because if you do a search for a shark fin on Google Images, that particular fin, this one right here, is the very first hit. And the guy who posted this image is well known as a guy who's very skilled with Photoshop, and his friends were all congratulating him on his skills. So here's the key idea. As Hemingway put it best, every man should have a built-in crap detector. Question everything you see on the web. Second source it, validate it. And we could talk at length about credibility and authoritativeness, but keep this in mind. This is part of informacy. So literacy in the age of Google, I think, boils down to being informant and having meta-literate skills. We have a huge range of products, a huge range of different kinds of things. The number of media types, the number of genres, the number of kinds of people producing this stuff is growing and growing every day. And the rate shows no sign of slowing down. Remember the Wikipedia example from before? So here's the dinosaur page from Wikipedia on the left and the one from Conservapedia on the right. The reason I'm showing this to you is because one of the informant skills our students need to have is how to dig into a topic. And one of the great things to know about something like Wikipedia is that you can dig into it and you can start to understand the arguments people make for it. For example, there's always a talk page. And so here I'm showing you the talk page from Wikipedia about dinosaurs. And see the things I've underlined in red? It says things like, it makes more sense if you look at a cladogram. Or, in normal parlance, birds have evolved from dinosaurs. Or, 65 million years from now, birds, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. The way the conversation is going here is about evolution. So you understand the perspective that they're coming from here. If you do the same thing on the Conservapedia, this is what you see. It's a different discussion. The questions here are questions like, dinosaurs were created on day 6, or what was the sequence of events on day 6 of creation? Or they were created as fish, birds, and mammals, not as eggs, and so on. Okay? Now, my point really here is not to convince you that creationism is correct or that evolution is correct, but that you can dig into the background behind these articles. And if you know that, then all of a sudden the assumptions are revealed here. It's not hidden behind the rhetorical style of Wikipedia, but you can actually see what is important to people here. So understanding that the Wikipedia style has this affordance, this ability to look at the talk discussion is a critical piece of informacy. So I see what's happening is that we're moving from a world where you can just search for things and find answers to a world where you can actually start to do this deeper kind of analysis. So when somebody asked me this question, when it rains in Seattle, is it really different than when it rains in Palo Alto or Violet? My sense was it was, but I didn't know how exactly. Well, it only took me about 5 minutes to do this. I went and searched out rainfall data. I downloaded and extracted the data, and then I dumped that into a spreadsheet, and I came up with this visualization. Okay, the blue line is Seattle. See that? When it starts to rain in Seattle, it pours, and it rains for 8 hours continuously. But in Palo Alto, it rains a little bit, it stops. It rains a little bit, it stops. I now, as an experienced searcher, can dig this information out, find it, and analyze it for myself. There is not a web page, except for my blog, that talks about this. But now every student can do this. This is a skill we need to pass on. We need to model this for our students. Because we're living in a world of information sufficiency. There's a lot of stuff out there. For example, using Google Fusion tables. It's a tool where you can take multiple tables of information and combine them and visualize the resulting data set. This is a nice example of looking at different occurrences of events inside of the Bay Area and San Francisco. The Guardian newspaper did this beautiful visualization of WikiLeaks. Truth is, anybody could have done this. They did it. They published it. It is a deep, insightful analysis of the pattern of particular events in Afghanistan during the period covered by WikiLeaks. My point, you can do this. Your students can do this. We can do this. Being an informant is meaning that you understand how to do this. I can write in visual terms. Key takeaway here, change is constant. It will continue to be constant. It will always be constant. Not only because more information is coming around, but new kinds and new capabilities are becoming possible. Google's in the business of providing new information, new indices, and new tools that allow you to search and filter that information. It's staggering. We have 120 million books in Google Books. 10 years of Google video being uploaded to Google YouTube every day. That's 72 hours a minute. You get the idea. It's a lot of stuff. We have 700,000 lolcat images alone. See my point? Stuff is there, but if you don't know how to access it, you don't know how to validate it, you don't know how to use it, you're in trouble. You're getting in this position where there's a kind of not a digital divide as much as a search divide, a research divide. Because if you use something like Google News, you can survey the world rapidly, the world, not just the newspapers in your state. You can see what Greece thinks about the Eurozone crisis. And now you can look at things like Google patents, not only US, but now Europe. You can dig deeply into those patents and find what prior art was there. And if you're on the wrong side of the research divide, you don't know these skills, someone who's on the other side can do it in a tenth or 1/100th the time that it would take you. Okay? These are the people who will have the real advantage. All this stuff is searchable in ways you might not have imagined. One of the examples I give in my blog is, I'm not interested in the address of that building that we're looking at now, but the address of the office from which I took this picture. Oh, more. I want to know the phone number of that office. Do you know how to do this? People on the correct side of the research skills divide would understand that here's the process for doing it. You look it up, you figure out what that building is, you do an image search, you validate that that's the logo for Telekomunikacja Polska, and then what? How do you figure out what building I'm standing in or what office I'm standing in? What you do is you look up that address and then go to Google Earth, match the views of that address with the photograph, and then turn around. Okay? Once you do that, it's really straightforward to then find the phone number is right there. This is an example of an impossible problem being converted into a trivial problem. But you need to know the skills. You need to be an informant, user of this information resources. This kind of stuff is growing all the time. You know about social skills, social search, search by image, hotel by distance, all these different resources that are out there. So, what it means to be literate now, I think, means to be informant. Okay? Informacy is being able to understand what information is out there and how you can use it. Equally important is the other skill of meta-literacy, being able to see what's changing in the information landscape and knowing how to take your metacognition for serious and learning new skills by using your current skills to find and learn those things. you, and I mean this personally for you, is to need to understand how this information content is available. And we need to understand these skills and teach them and model them for our students. Ultimately, what it means is that you need to become a meta-literate person. It's not enough to just be informant now, because the informant base, that is, the stuff that's out there now, is going to change in 4 years. Well, it's like you've been Rip Van Winkle, offline for 50 years. So it is important to remember, literacy means not just reading, writing, arithmetic, not spelling, but the ability to do research. The ability to get outside of your worldview, to see the rest of the world in appropriate context and in ways that you hadn't anticipated. So how do we do this? Well, as Lucy mentioned at the top of the hour, I teach a class. I have a MOOC, a massive open online course for search skills. And this is one thing you can do. We'll be offering this again in the not too distant future. If you follow my blog or you follow the G+ for Inside Search, you'll be able to see when the next one begins. This one's slightly out of date. You can actually go to powersearchingwithgoogle.com, and you can actually go take the course right now. You just can't get the certificate until we actually offer the course synchronously. But you can actually go see all the content. And if you'd like to use that content in your classes, be my guest. You have my permission. So it's a set of 32 video modules with a lot of exercises and suggestions on how to do that. So you can take a class, but importantly, what I want you to do is be aware of the changes in your information ecosystem. You live in one. Part of that could be, for example, subscribing to newsletters or to blogs. For example, my blog is an easy way to do it. You could also subscribe to the Google official search blog. You could apply, for all I care, follow the Bing blog. It doesn't matter. But subscribe to something so you get a little bit of information every day, because you need to stay up on this. You need to understand the resources you have. Or you could do something like play a serious game. So I have a game. You knew I was going to say that, right? I have a game called googleaday.com, and you can go there, and it's basically a series of search challenges that then you play, and your search skills get better. So here's one: how to find this particular answer, and we teach you how to actually do that. So that's a nice resource to have. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, there's my blog. So you can actually go see the particulars for how to solve in detail that one. And if you go to my blog, every Wednesday I have another search challenge like this, and every Thursday I answer it. I'm also syndicated in Lifehacker, so that's one way to stay on top. So with that, I'm going to stop and open it up for questions. We've got about 7 minutes or so remaining, but I wanted to emphasize it's important that you take these skills on. It's not enough just to listen to this hour and go away and think, that was nice, because the world's changing, it's changing rapidly. Stay on top of it. Thanks very much. Any questions? So if you have a question, you can either go to your voice, go to your talk, or type it in chat. Either one, I'll answer both of them.
I've enabled audio privileges for everyone if you want to grab the mic and ask Dan any questions. Lots of resources here for you to go through. I think he is on Twitter. He's also on Google Plus too, Dan.
Yeah.
Google Plus page up here?
That's my Twitter handle, @DNRussell. Okay, if nobody has a question, how about comments? Are there particular, I asked earlier if anybody had particular spoof sites that they like. And so one that I like is dihydrogen, I'm putting in here, dioxide.com. Dihydrogen dioxide. Okay.
Hey, Dan, why don't you tell us about your search challenges that you post in your blog? I think those are kind of interesting, and I think that
Sure.
they're,
so
I mean, you can kind of go along with the Google a day.
Yeah.
But I think using how are teachers, how could they use it instructionally? I see kind of them as being used as kind of, we do something called daily oral language, where we put up a couple of sentences for kids to correct, maybe in elementary school. I could see a daily a daily search activity like this, like the Google a day.
Right. So the Google a day is a nice source of daily search challenges. On my blog, as I mentioned, every Wednesday, you can see here, this is one from February 1st, 2011. Every Wednesday I post a challenge like this. So, for example, the one from this week was relatively easy. It was a question about what is the order of an animal that has lungless, that is without lungs, animals, and photosynthetic animals and vertebrates in it. So it's a good one for kids. You know, it's appropriate for like 4th to 8th grade kind of thing. It's a pretty easy one, a lot of fun. So it's an easy thing to go pick up and go for it. You know, if you want to use these things, you don't have to ask my permission. And we also have a booklet that we can send you if you're interested. So if you, we have a collection of these. We have about 50 of them. They're all written up, and it's available that way as well. So I'd like your question, Lucy.
Do you still teach face-to-face classes too, Dan, or are you finding the MOOC to be more effective? What was so interesting to me about the first MOOC that you did, that you told me that you had 90,000 people sign up and 20,000 people completed. Yeah. And I just thought that was fascinating to me. The mass sheer numbers that you can reach that way seems much more effective than doing face-to-face classes. Yeah,
you know, there's a value in teaching face-to-face. In particular, with very young kids and older people, it's really valuable to do that face-to-face because they often will do little behaviors that you cannot figure out if you're just trying to teach in a MOOC. In particular, elder people have a lot of problems with object selection or trying to type in particular ways. So, yeah, you're right. It's not going to go away. It's one of those things where if you're already competent in sort of basic information skills, then it works out pretty well. Otherwise, I think, so when I teach these face-to-face classes, I find it interesting because I learn as much from them as I think they're learning from me. Because I can ask them questions, and dig into, well, why did you ask that way, right? And I think that's really valuable. And I can't do that in a MOOC. But the MOOC is effective, as you mentioned, because we had, since July 10th, when we started this whole thing, we've had 250,000 people sign up for the class. And that's a pretty amazing number. If I taught, say, 250,000 students every year, if I were a college faculty member, it would take me 1,000 years to do this. But I did it in 6 months. So I'm trying to educate the world, and I have a reasonable crack at getting to it. So that's the advantage and the trade-off. Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time.
Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. This session will be recorded so you can revisit it, potentially use it for PD in your classroom, everyone, or your school for your colleagues, because I think it's really important to convey to others how we need to teach search literacy, and it starts with us as educators. If we don't know how to do this, then our kids are not going to know how to do it. So thank you, Dan. Sure. One last thing, I'm going to ask everybody to leave in a second because I have to process the recording. But we have another keynote coming. Here's the link to it. It's Michael Tricano from the World Bank. He's a really dynamic speaker, and he's following us immediately, so you may want to jump over there if you're looking to continue our learning journey today. So thanks again, Dan. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.